Twitter, when they released the progressive web application, they increased by 75% the number of tweets sent, thanks to the progressive web app functionalities. Did you know that? Okay. So I'm Jorge Ferreira. I'm a front-end software engineer at Eventbrite. Previously, I was doing a back-end internship at Amazon. I'm a blogger, DJ, and I'm a huge fan of musicals, Hamilton especially, and I want to get tickets, but it's hard. Yeah, I'm also a mentor here at PennApps, so just let me know if you need any help with web development or career advice, because those are topics that I particularly love. So, who knows where Spain is? Madrid? Okay, I'm from there. I'm currently based there, so I come all the way here just for this presentation and for being with you guys, so I'm pretty excited. I have a YouTube show called Developers in Dev, where I interview top leaders, CTOs, VPs, director of engineering. And the idea is bring their knowledge to people like you that are starting their careers that want that kind of advice. So if you want to check it out, it's there. Just search for my name. But let's get started. So we have a very busy agenda. I would like to basically start with the motivation, why we are here, why I'm talking about progressive web app, and why I'm so excited about it. And then we will dive deep to several steps into the implementation on all the progressive web app functionalities in a React application. I put some important quotes are with the start, but yeah. Okay, so this is my Twitter handle, that's my hashtag, and I always like to say sharing is caring. So if you really enjoy the talk, just let me know your thoughts. If you hate the talk, just let me know your thoughts as well. So just feel free to post whatever you want. There will be my handle and the hashtag on the bottom of the slides. So I want to start with the outcome of this presentation. So what we are actually going to build. So this is my particular hack, but I was basically working on this progressive web app, which is a very simple PennApps agenda. So that's what we are going to work on. That application is built with React, Webpack, Yarn workspaces, as well as Emotion for all the stylists, all the style. So what is this application going to have? So we are going to have offline mode, meaning, okay, the user doesn't have internet connection. What is going to happen? Is the user going to be able to actually access the website? Then the local notifications, which is, okay, I want to notify the user when some events happen or when something interesting is going on. Then we will learn the cache requests, all the caching mechanism, which for me it's kind of the secret sauce of the progressive web apps. How do you cache resources and make sure you don't mess around with all the cache stuff. And then we will see the payments API, which is something I'm particularly excited. How can you have native payment checkout flow just on your browser. What we are not gonna build for this talk, we will not see background sync and index.db. If any of you have experience with progressive web app, that's kind of a more advanced topic, so I'll just leave it out of this presentation. Yeah, the source code is on my GitHub, so if you go to Ferreira and you search for PWA 101, you will find the source code of the stuff that I'm gonna present today. If you see super late commits yesterday night, that was me, it's not a bot. So yeah, I have several goals because I know most of you, some of you will have lots of experience with web developments, others are gonna start, others are gonna not know anything about progressive web apps, so it's kind of a bit hard to target a talk like that, but I want to create value on all of you. So for beginners, I would like to share with you why progressive web apps, why is everybody talking about that, why is so cool, and have some roughly small intuitions on, all right, so what does it look like? For people that have web development experience with no progressive web app background, meaning you haven't built anything before, I think this talk is going to be really great because you'll have a project that is up and running, so you can test it out, play around with that, and also you can get some ideas, and maybe you will say, hey, I'm gonna start applying this stuff and see what happens. And then is anybody expert on progressive web app here? You guys here? You guys there? No? Okay, so cool. So if you're not, if you're an expert, you will not probably learn new stuff or know new stuff, but you will see like a different point of view of this stuff. I posted here this lovely emoji, but I guess all of you are eating already. It's good, the stuff, the cookies are fine. Do you like them? Okay, so let's get started. So what are progressive web apps? Anybody of you know that? Like, can you roughly tell me how does it like, for you, what is a progressive web app? Anybody? Come on, don't be shy, don't be shy. What progressive means? Yeah, go ahead.
It's just my guess. It's like a web application that kind of mimics a native experience.
Yeah, you're an expert on that, right? So yeah, that's exactly what a progressive web app is for me. Like, it's basically bringing mobile native applications functionalities into the web. And that's a huge thing, because basically historically the main difference, like when you're working on a web application or a native app is, oh, but I need push notifications so I can re-engage to my customers. Oh, but I need offline mode because if I don't have connection, I cannot do anything with the application. So that was like most of like the friction points between web development and native applications. But that friction point is reducing right now. Of course, there's some functionalities, some APIs, like some sensors of the phone that you cannot access right now with the web. But at least the most important stuff for pretty like common products itself with a progressive web app. So this term, which is really cool, was kind of like invented by two guys at Facebook. So Alex Russell and Jake Archibald, basically they say they are really good on, you know, saying, hey, we need a marketing name for this stuff, because historically we were kind of like always, you know, oh, I create a new functionality for this browser, but actually you need to offer backwards compatible with Internet Explorer. How many of you actually have started coding a website and say, oh, I need to think about Internet Explorer 11? Yeah. At Eventbrite, sometimes I have fixed bugs on Internet Explorer 11. That doesn't sound sexy, right? So yeah, but the kind of the mentality here is, I don't really care what the user has. Like, I don't really care about the browser. If there is a functionality that exists, I'm gonna use it. If the user has push notifications because the browser is so cool that it's implemented the latest standard, I'm gonna use it. But if the user doesn't have that, that's okay. I will just like offer like a more reduced experience, but the user will still see the website. So that's kind of like the mentality. So here is kind of like, I just posted like different stuff on what a progressive web app means, like the real features, but it's like, it's not rocket science. So the first one is responsive. Let's be like super cool responsive design that can adjust to all the mobile screen size, right? Because basically, like, if we are saying we want to mimic, we want to kind of emulate native applications, that means that this kind of stuff will run on mobile devices. Works offline. When you create your first progressive web app and works offline, it's like, oh my God, that's so cool. That's kind of like the excitement. So yeah, works offline, like you need to make sure you download some resources beforehand, or you cache some resources. So once the user hit the offline mode, you can actually see all the resources there. App-like interactions kind of like mimic this, all the look and feel of native applications. Fresh, oops, sorry. Yeah, fresh is, oh, maybe, no, okay. Yeah, so fresh means the main challenge of any native application is how I'm gonna release, how I'm gonna put a new version of my product out there, right? So with native, with progressive web app, it's kind of like the same story. How are you gonna make sure that you can release a new version to your users and they will use that? Safe. Most of the stuff And I think all of the stuff related to progressive web applications will require an HTTPS server. The cool stuff that in this repository that I created, you have like an HTTPS server up and running with all the certificates and all that stuff. That's a bit tricky to actually set up locally. But once you have it, it's like keep playing around. So you need to be HTTPS because you are working with payments. You're basically creating like a small window that can do some stuff in the background. So browsers wants to make sure like you're not doing something suspicious, and you have like a validated SSL certificate. Discoverable. Basically, like, how are your users going to see your website? How are they going to access to that? The cool stuff is like, the more the progressive web app gets mature and more people and more companies start using that, they are started actually integrated into the online stores. Like, for example, Play stores from Google. I think they are starting to indexing progressive web apps, so it's something like it's there. In this case, discoverable also means like it's a web application at the end of the day. So if you search on Google, you will find it. Re-engageable. That's a huge thing. Like, how can I make sure like I create a product and I keep telling my user, hey, come back to me. Like, how many times actually have you seen like Instagram notifications and you always like ended up going to Instagram? Because it happens to me all the time. So yeah, it's one of the, like the pills that these huge companies use to basically make sure like you can come back and keep generating money for them. So this is a huge thing. Linkable. It's a URL, so you can share it. It's pretty easy. And durable, meaning if I have some data stored, like if I store some data, I want to make sure like this will persist over the time. So yeah, I mentioned this before, but there is a concept that describes what I said about like, I'm not gonna wait till the browser supports this functionality. I'm gonna give this functionality if it's available, which is progressive enhancement. Enhancement, it's a bit hard word for me to pronounce in English. Is correct, like enhancement? Okay, cool. So progressive enhancement. Yeah, which is, let's use the latest browser functionalities and let's not wait and let's kill Internet Explorer 11 basically. And this is kind of like the intuition, like, there are some people that will see a very simple cake with nothing around them, but then like the cake starts to be more and more interesting, and it ended up to be like a super awesome cake, super delicious. Well, it's like a graphic, but yeah, that's kind of like the illustration for that. I want to make sure like the experience keeps growing as far as the user has these functionalities available. Why is this important? I think we are so lucky because we haven't suffered that much, like what it looks like to not have a good internet connection. We haven't suffered like what it looks like to have a really crappy phone. Well, I had in the past, but I mean, so all of this is important because the reality out there is like they don't have iPhones, they don't have Pixel phones, and they have like a whole variety of phones, from very crappy ones, really cheap ones, to super fancy and super expensive. So that's a problem because like these very cheap phones, they don't have that much memory. Maybe they are in a country where the internet connection is not that good. So you need to think about it when you're actually building a product. Like, how is your product, especially if it's international and you aim to be like a global product, how is your product gonna fit into several markets that actually don't have like super fancy infrastructures to support your super cool application? So this is kind of like two examples. So in Africa, for example, you can have a very simplified version of that. Like you can have like a, try to load not so many resources, like don't load the images, data safe mode, etc. Limit access to advanced functionalities. So it's basically like a limited version. Like if you see that cake, like that super empty cake. But then, if you go to US and you have like a 4 or 5G connection and you have a super cool phone, and by the way, I'm having the Pixel 2 and I'm super like disappointed with that. It's not working fine after 1.5 years. But anyway, I put a Pixel just because. For example, in the Pixel, you will have a super high quality image. Yeah, like it's not a problem, right? Like you can download assets, and then like you can have some advanced functionality like push, background sync, etc. So if we, like, this is a super simplification of these, like, but this is like how progressive enhancement at the end of the day is gonna look. Like a bunch of if-else conditionals. If user has this, do that. Otherwise, don't do anything. That's kind of like the idea behind this. So why progressive web apps? At this point, do you have like any idea why progressive web apps? Anybody of you? What is the problem that they try to solve? Yeah.
Cross-platform compatibility.
Yeah. Like right now, for example, if you create a new application, you need to target for Android, for iOS. I mean, this is kind of like a separate story, but sometimes, for example, users don't have your application installed in your phone, and you need to fall back to your website. So this fits into this kind of like also a good use case for that. But yeah, so for me, I like progressive web app for several reasons, but this summarizes that. First is distribution freedom. We don't depend on Apple or on Google to basically accept with whatever rules they want. Like, yeah, I'm gonna accept your application, it meets this criteria. Here, it doesn't happen like that. Like, you put your application out there, if the user hits the add to home screen button, like, they will have the application. So there's no like, that kind of like process, filtering process on the applications marketplaces. Push notifications, no install required. Like you just hit one button and boom, you have like your application on the home screen. It downloads some assets, but that's super reduced comparing to a native application. Offline mode. It turns out like this improves user retention and conversions. And it makes sense, right? Like if I want to access Spotify and I want to listen my music while I'm commuting and I don't have internet connection while I'm on an airplane, Spotify is cool. But then if I have like an application that doesn't have that functionality and while I'm going on holidays I don't have that application is not cool. So it's kind of like, that's why retention and all that stuff matters. Yeah, and tend to be smaller. I have some metrics later on to validate this point, but yeah, they tend to be reduced size than native applications. Okay, progressive web apps in the industry. This is the last point for kind of like the motivation context. Do you know any application, web application that you use on your day-to-day that is a progressive web app? Do you know any? Who uses Twitter for mobile, like mobile.twitter.com? Twitter, it's a progressive web app, and actually they are kind of like not necessarily like the super leaders on that, but I think they are creating cool stuff with progressive web apps. So yeah, Twitter is a good example of that, but it's not only that, and I will show you right after this. So it turns out like when Twitter released their new progressive web app, they reduced 70% data consumption. They increased 65% pages per session, and they increased 75% the tweets sent that I mentioned before. Alibaba, or I don't know what's the pronunciation, but Alibaba, 76% conversion increase, and then like 4x higher interaction rate from add to home screen, like that functionality of basically adding the progressive web app and make sure like it's on the launch dashboard on your phone. Starbucks. Who doesn't love a Starbucks? Well, I have like a love-hate story with the Starbucks, but anyway. They have like, when they released the new progressive web app, they increased like 12% the orders week per week. And that was in May 2018. And then like they double the monthly active users, which is like a huge benefit for the company in terms of money, in terms of revenue. Tinder. How many of you use Tinder? So Tinder, they actually partnered up with an agency and they come up with this progressive web application, and they basically reduced from 11.30 seconds to 4.69 seconds in that loading time, which is like a lot. Like if you wait literally 11 seconds until Tinder is there, like you will say, I prefer to go out. Well, no, probably no. But yeah, it's a lot. And then like 90% smaller than the Android version of Tinder. So you get the same functionality, which is matching with people, but less space, faster experience. So this is a comparison, like the Android application back at that time, it was 30 megabytes, while Tinder PWA was 2.8 megabytes, which is like a lot. Pinterest, the numbers are like, blew my mind. 401% number of pins increase. 103% active users increase on mobile web. And then plus 843 new sign-ups year per year with the PWA. That's a huge benefit. So you just get like a bunch of engineers and you have those metrics like, yeah, and then I put here like an application. Well, it's a website that is really cool for basically checking like where PWA's apps are out there, and it's really cool actually to check it out and see what's going on. Okay, so far so good. Yeah, because now we are starting to let's build our first PWA. Okay. So this is the result. There will be some videos, so you will actually see more clear this stuff. And as I mentioned before, we will focus on these 4 points, which is like a lot of content. And we will just leave it out these 2 ones, but actually I posted like different links at the end. So if you are curious and you are excited about progressive PWAs, I'm sorry because I'm just behind the monitor and I think I never seen you. You can just go and check it out. So the first thing we will need is make sure like your application, your HTML has the right meta tags. So the first thing is the viewport. Does anybody know why we need the width equals the byte width? Any idea? Yeah?
Scalable device. Scalable device.
What is it? Yeah, so that's it. There is a very interesting link by Mozilla, but basically like, I hope like I will explain fine. But basically, even though like your iPhone has like 300 pixels, which is not the case, but let's suppose it's 300 pixels. When they are rendering the website, they tend to render in a bigger screen and then they shrink, they reduce. I think they did it like back at that time when Steve Jobs released the first iPhone and all that stuff. They wanted the pinch functionality. So they basically, if they try to say, no, I'm going to use this, the real width, basically many applications that are not responsive will break. So they have like that kind of, not hack, but that kind of like feature. But if you specify width equals the byte width, it will use the real width of the device. And there is a link from Mozilla Developer Network, which I think is really interesting to see like, okay, more in depth, like how does it work. The second stuff is like the theme color. So many of you have seen like, if you go to the web experiences of those products, you will see like the navigation to be on a different color. That's because they have this meta tag specify like theme color content equals a hash, like a hex color. Apple, we love you. We need to specify more meta tags only for you. So yeah, so basically those are the ones that we need to at least specify for an Apple. Like the first one is the title, which is like if you open up like your iPhone and you see like the icons and the text, that's the title. The var style, like you have white, you have black, and then the last point is really important to make sure like your app is set up for responsive and from PWA. And I add this emoji, like, okay. But we have more stuff that we need to actually specify for Apple. So basically like, you know, like different phones have like different resolutions. So if you want to target to all of them and make sure like you have the right image with the right resolution, you need to make sure like you add all of these. Luckily, I haven't like, I didn't write all of these by hand, to be honest. I've just went to the favicon-generator.org and I've just like generate one, copy, paste it, that's it. So copy and paste all the time. No, I'm kidding. Well, sometimes. Yeah, and this is basically like the icons with the titles. So yeah. Second thing is the manifest.json. Do you know what the manifest.json is or why is that used for? Yeah. No? So it's just basically like a configuration file, like a bunch of meta tags, basically telling the browser, hey, if my application is valid for being a progressive web app, if I can install that in the home screen of the user, get this data, which is this one, in order to actually know what you need to display and to show to the user. So interesting stuff like short name, yeah, basically like the icon with the text. You need then the start URL. I don't know if you realize like the difference between this page and the other. Sorry. If you see like all the UTM, which is RTIN tracking module, I think. That's basically just for analytics. The main problem is like, if you open the Google Analytics and want to see like how much traffic comes from a PWA versus no PWA, like how much traffic comes from the ones that the user install in their home screen versus the one that the user sees just like twitter.com, you need to specify like some sort of like parameters in the URL. So in the Google Analytics or whatever you're using for tracking, you will actually differentiate and you can create funnels with saying, okay, how many traffic comes from this, how many traffic comes from that. So that like, I put UTM source, kind of like a standard for URL trackings, but you can put whatever you prefer. Some other interesting thing are the icons. So these are like, at least you need to specify these two icons. The first one is like in Android, what they are gonna use for the icon. And the second one, which is bigger, it's gonna be basically for the splash screen. So once you hit the PWA, like once you launch that, you will see like a splash screen with an icon and a background. So that is that image what is used for it. Then if you check out this stuff here, we have some more metadata. We have the display, we have theme color, background color, yeah, pretty much it. I'm going to focus now on the display because I think that's interesting to know, like how do you configure this parameter. So there are like different bunch of values that you can provide. And the interesting thing is that this goes from button to app, and the idea is basically like if your user doesn't support full screen, it will goes to the next value, so far so on. So basically it's kind of like a fallback method, like a waterfall. So you just hit to the one you want, and then like the browser will decide which one to actually use. Full screen, useful for video games, not really useful for PWAs because users can get very confused, like how can I exit this application? But yeah, a standalone is kind of like the one that is most used for this because basically it will remove like the top top knob, but you will still see the buttons at the bottom. Well, I'm talking about Android, but on iOS, like, it's gonna be pretty much the same. And then you have minimal UI and browser. And then again, like, if you're interested about it, like, you can go to that link and see more info. Then something that is important is, like, anytime that you create something, especially in the PWA world, make sure, like, you test it out. So you will see here, is this running? Oh, it's just like static assets. So basically, if you go to the DevTools, which, by the way, like, when you are developing PWAs and web development in general is like kind of your best friend, and you need to invest a lot of time to actually learn how to use it, because it will save you a lot of time later on. Yeah, it's basically, if you go to the application tab and then manifest, you will actually see, like, what the browser's actually understanding from your manifest, and if there is any problem. For example, in this case, I think the font is really small, but you will see, like, in the second one, in stylability, it says no matching service worker detected. And installability means the user will not be able to add to home screen, at least you add a valid service worker that I'm gonna talk more right after this. So yeah, pretty useful. And then, like, you have Lighthouse, which is kind of like not a new tool, but it's a tool from that is built in on top inside the Chrome experience, which is really great for running, like, performance measurements of your website, etc. Okay, secret sauce: intro to service workers. Service workers are, like, once you know them, it's like a super good friend, like, it's super awesome, but it can be a little bit painful sometimes, especially when you debug. So what is a service worker? I think the simplification is basically, it's just like a JavaScript file which can run in their own scope. Like, once you run a service worker, it's not like in the main threads of your application, it runs on a separate scope, like kind of like a sandbox. And it's just like a file which bunch of stuff that you can run and you can execute. But what I really like to see, or the way I look at service worker, is a proxy. So it's that person that is gonna be between me, the application, and the user, well, between me, the application, and the server, and will be that person that will introspect and will receive all the requests and decide what to do with them. So for me, it's more like a proxy, like a man in the middle that will, like, learn, know what the user is doing, and based on some criteria, like conditionals, it will decide what to do. And like an example of this is, hey, should I request this image again to the server, or can I use, like, a local storage, a local cache copy of that? That could be an option. Like, all that routing logic and caching logic relies on the service worker level. So let's write our first service worker. It's gonna be pretty simple. I'm gonna basically log anytime that the user anytime that the user is requesting new URLs, new assets, new information, I'm gonna log it and say, hey, the user is requesting this URL, which is very dummy, very simple one, but illustrates kind of like the purpose of a service worker. So we need two separate things. We need, in one place, specify where our service worker is and register that service worker, and in other place, we will basically have the logic for the service worker. So the first one is, boom. It's simple. It's basically saying, if the browser supports service worker, I'm gonna register a new service worker. That's what all of this means. And then, like, if you have the registration object, you can console log, or you can do other stuff with that. But that's kind of like the logic. If exists, register a new service worker that will rely on the slash, no, what's the word in English for this? Backlash? Oh, backlash, no? Oh, backslash. Okay, backlash. Thank you, West. I learned so much today, these days in US. Yeah, so backlash. Backlash service worker.js. Then we need to actually write the logic of the SWA.js, right? We need to write the logic of the service worker. So basically, you can add different event listeners to the service worker. Are you familiarized with this concept of callbacks and event listeners? Are you familiarized? Do you want to explain that?
So this event listener is just monitoring the interactions with the pane itself. Whenever the event is triggered that it's looking for, they'll trigger some series of response to it.
Yeah, good. I will give you stickers later on. Thank you. Yeah, that's the idea. So let me go there. Yeah. So we have like two concepts. One is the event that we are interested in to listen to, which is what is the quote install. And then what you see there, that's arrow functions, which is like another way of writing function, parentheses, curly braces. But basically you're saying, this is my callback. So how is that going to work? Anytime like there is a new event, like anytime that a new install event is emitted, it will call that function. It will call my callback, and that's how it works. When install happens, when the browser install happens of this service worker, I want you to call this function. That's kind of like what like these lines mean. And here we are listening for install events, but we can actually listen for more stuff. So in service worker, for example, we can listen for the fetch events. And the fetch events is anytime that I'm requesting a new resource, this guy is called. So I'm just going to say I'm intercepting network requests. This is the URL of that request, and I'm going to log it. That's it. So I think this example illustrates really well, like this kind of like proxy functionality of a service worker. It's basically, I wanted this file, do whatever you need to with that request. And this is like, can you see this? Yeah. Let me put it again. So I refresh the page, and basically I'm logging any single request. And the interesting part is like, it goes from manifest.json, all the CSS files, the bundles, the images, basically anything that will hit a server or anything that will hit a file, you will run a new request for that. Like you will get a new request. And this is kind of like for seem better. So in this case, we are not doing actually anything with the request. But if I'm a bad guy, I can basically say, I'm going to respond with the same resource over and over. Like you can do basically whatever you want. So that's why service worker are a bit tricky, because they have a huge power. But what is that word like from the movie Star Wars? Like big power comes, huh? Yeah, like, so basically this is kind of like the same. So yeah, cool. We have written our first service worker. Now let's go to the offline mode with Cache API. So the idea of Cache API, or the way I see it, is like a key value storage mechanism. It's kind of like a, if you work with Java, like a hash map or a map, or if you work in Python, like dictionaries, I think they're called, or if you work in JavaScript, an object literal. That's the same thing. So the key is going to be like, this is the request, and the value is going to be the response. Like a response can be like, okay, this is the file that I want you to store. So the cool stuff about the Cache API is that basically give us programmatic control over caching assets. So basically means do whatever you want with that. Cache whatever you want, delete the cache. It's your responsibility. So I like to put this key, like cache all the things, just to illustrate like not use this kind of like idea. I think like you need to be extra careful, like what are the resources that you want to cache? Have a very clear like a very clear solution on how are you gonna resolve like new updates to that cache. Make sure like you clear all the resources. So you need to be careful with that. So this is like an example on caching a critical assets. So by critical assets, I mean, in this case, all those files that I need to basically offer an offline mode experience. The minimum files will be index.html, it can be a CSS file. So basically, all the critical assets that I need to offer that offline experience, I will load it here. As well as, for example, the JavaScript bundle you will need here. So that's what I mean by critical assets. And we are gonna see from a very, very, very small like use of the cache API to actually that side of the part where basically we're gonna offer a more advanced functionality. So this is kind of like the way you use the cache API. So you call caches.open, and then like you specify kind of like the namespace, kind of like a key that you wanna use. So in this case, for example, resources v1. It's really important when you're working with PWAs and all these cache, all the cache techniques, to make sure like you think about the versioning and you think about all that stuff. Because basically, once you want to upgrade these, what are you gonna do, right? Like, how are you gonna make sure like the experience keeps going? And then like all of these cache APIs, promise-based. So you will just listen to the then with the cache object and the catch if there is an error while opening the cache. Yeah, so again, if you're interested to load like critical assets, there is kind of like a condition of basically I don't want to install this service worker if those critical assets are not downloaded. So that's the reason why, and this is like a very simple example, but we will see how to actually break the installation of a service worker if those assets are not downloaded. Because again, if you're writing a service worker for offline mode and you don't have the assets required to offer an offline mode experience, there's no point to install that service worker. Cool. So this is like, can you see this good? Like on the back? Cool. So there is interesting things there. You have like data array. Basically, I'm specifying index.html and client.bundle. Actually, the application that is on GitHub has more resources. Like, for example, a fallback image. I think the manifest, some other normalize.css, like has some more resources, but like this is kind of like for the example is fine. And then like in the install, basically I'm gonna call event.waitUntil that I will explain later on what does it mean and how is that used for. And then I'm gonna call cache assets, which is gonna be like a promise with all the logic. I do this just like because I like to write the small functions and make sure like they're super easy to read. So if I go here and say, okay, so what are you actually doing in the installation? And I see, all right, it's just one line, event.waitUntil, and then you say, all right, so you're calling this function. Basically, I'm saying, all right, so basically you wanna in the installation to wait until all these resources are resolved and are downloaded. So the function cache assets will call our friend caches.open. So we will like get a new instance of the cache object. And then as you can see, and that's an interesting thing, I cannot like point it out there, but if you see in the then, you say there is the cache no critical assets and return cache critical assets. What does it mean? So I want to resolve this promised with the value from cache critical assets, which means if that promise fails, this will break. So if I'm not able to download all the critical assets, it's gone. Because basically event.waitUntil will just break. So that's why I'm returning on purpose the cache critical assets. And then in the first line is the cache no critical assets. Because again, like no critical assets, which is a nice to have, but is not important, I don't care. So in the cache no critical assets there, I have like a foo.css, but you can just add there whatever you want to, like images, other assets, etc. And then the cache critical assets, I'm calling this cache object and say add all, and the array of critical assets. That behind the scenes will basically make a fetch request for each of those assets and return that. And since everything is promise-based, if that fails, boom, it's gone. It will fail. More on even don't wait until. I think I already spoiled this slide, but it's kind of like same idea. It's basically, it's kind of like saying, hey, wait until all of this is resolved. Wait, don't do anything. I want this to be resolved before you keep going in the different like fetch or in the push, etc. event listeners that you have in the service worker. So it's a way to actually say, wait here, until this is not resolved, you will not keep going. And basically like the last point, which is the more interesting part, which is if the resolve promise fails, it will not install anything. Another interesting tab to check is basically once you do this process, like once we execute, I took this slide after executing the previous code. Once you execute that, you will see here in the cache storage, the namespace, in this case like version 1, and then there you will see all the cache resources. And the cool stuff is that actually you can see it's just like button here, but basically here you will preview what is the file that you actually cache. And then like if you go to service workers, if you go to clear storage, you will see a diagram of how much cache asset, like how many assets have you cached, like what's the size of that cache assets. Which is the next slide. I spoil myself over and over. So is this one, basically. You will see like, I downloaded those assets and 2.1 megabytes, and then like the rest of the stuff, like index.db, as well as the service worker size. This is like a zoom on that. But yeah, it's the same idea. I have used a lot of time when I was working with this on the clear site data, so it's also your friend. Cool, and this is like kind of like a warning, which is make sure like you remove all the cache resources once you change from one to the other. So it's kind of like don't forget to clear your cache basically. And the way you can do it is once the new service worker is activated, that's the place where you will basically need to get all the cache resources, like get all the keys and say, if this belongs to a previous version of the service worker, that's why it's really important to have like that namespace, delete them from the cache. So you need to implement this by hand. Yeah, and then we have like this is like another cool example, which is fetch image or placeholder. So as you can see in the example, is the example working? Yeah. So once I download the application, I will just get the image. But if I go offline mode, I will fall back to this placeholder image that you have there. So it's really interesting when you want to like have that behavior. So the way you specify that is the following. Basically in the fetch, you intercept the request and say, all right, so what are the headers? Like this resource, what is accepting? And you just say, okay, it's accepting an image. Then I will just respond with this thing. And the event.response with, we'll call this promise, which is fetch image or placeholder. I do it because I think it's a good practice not to keep adding stuff to the fetch, because that will grow a lot. So I like to split it up into separate functions. And that function, the way it looks like, it's like this. It's basically saying, first I'm gonna fetch, so I'm gonna actually try to do the real network request. Then if I get a successful request, I'm gonna make sure like if it's okay, meaning, okay, this is the real resource. If I don't get the real resource, I will throw an error because I want to fall back to the second block, which is the catch part. And in the catch part, basically what I'm gonna do is, hey, do you have this cache image placeholder? If so, please return. So that's what it's doing. It's like a bunch of if-else conditionals, like if this is success, response, otherwise fall back to the cache image that you have. Yeah. Okay. There is another concept which is network with cache backup. So you can see the main difference between this and the previous example is in the previous example, I just returned a placeholder. What I'm going to do here is if I successfully get the request while the user was online, I'm going to cache that into the user's browser. As you can see there, you see like image, and then I will return that. So that's the strategy of fetching the request. If the request is successfully, I want to cache them. So you see here is the same idea, fetch image or placeholder, nothing new. But then like the difference is like I add that part in the middle, which is I want to open the cache and then basically store that cache response. Otherwise, I just want to return the placeholder. So for this section, further reading is going to be Workbox, which is a library that the guys from Facebook created. And it's really great for all these caching mechanisms. So here we implemented the hard way, like by ourselves. Like we implemented everything, like using all the service workers API. But Google offers like a way to, some of this stuff actually you don't need to take care and it will handle that for you. Cool. I'm gonna go a little bit faster on this because I know like it's kind of like lunchtime, so I'm gonna just like keep going a little bit faster. But basically like the Web Payments API, I don't know if there is audio. So this is something that excites me a lot, which is offering like all the payments, like all the native experience payments on the browser. So this is a video from Google that you can check, but it's really nice. So basically all this data that you see there is data that you can pass. Like you can provide the order summary, the delivery address will get, for example, the cron delivery address, like the ones that you saved. But basically you specify like the total amount, etc. So the way it works is, I'm just gonna go briefly. If you're interested, you can just check. But basically, you have like 3 stuff: the methods, the details, and the options. The methods is basically what credit cards do you offer to the user, what payments are accepted. The details is basically like kind of the summary, like this is what you bought and this is the price. And then the option is like, if you are requesting a specific stuff, you can just specify there. If you are requesting like the payer email, the payer name, it's a way to basically tell, in this case, like Chrome, like, hey, make sure like you request this information from the user. And then like you just create a new payment request and that's it. Once you create the request, there is like different options you can pass. You can also add more event listeners. Like if you want to, for example, once the user is seeing the shipping addresses, if the user starts to change that, you want to persist that in your application. Like you basically want to say this user has changed their shipping address, so I will just get that information. So you specify that with these like event listeners handlers. You're basically saying if the payment method changed, I want to call this function. If the shipping address changed, I want to call this other function. And then like you internally, if you're using React, you will need to keep that state, to keep the state and update the state. But it's kind of like the same idea. And then once you have the request object, you just call show, and basically it will just like launch the payment model. So I don't know. Yeah. So I click on the RSVP, like I click there, and basically this model show up. Yeah. And it's really nice. Like once the more browsers start supporting these, like this is gonna be like a huge thing for web development. local notifications. So I add this stuff, which is, okay, once you click there, I will send a local notification to the user saying, hey, you have subscribed to Jorge updates for this particular event item, or you have subscribed to another event, and you will see that local notification there. In order to have these, like, you will need to actually request the prompt to the user so they can accept the getting notifications. But again, like, the way it works is basically, if notification exists in the window, meaning if that browser supports notification, first request the permission. Yeah, request permission. Then it gets a permission object. You pass all the metadata that you want to have for that notification, and you just simply say, boom, new notification, and that's it. Advanced topics on this is going to be like, see the web push notifications. So this is all local, but actually you can do like more advanced and cool stuff, which is, okay, you have like from your server, whenever you want, like having a cron job or having something else, you can actually send notifications to the user no matter when, which is really great. And then like, the next version of that is making sure like you include Vapid. Well, I don't know if that's the pronunciation, but it's like a method to make sure, like, kind of, but it's a method to like for extra security on the push notifications. So we are just finishing this part. This is the last item, which is the app shell model. This is like, it's just like more a concept rather than like code, but the concept is basically saying the app shell model, the shell, is kind of like the minimum layout, like the minimum layout components that you need to show to the user without dynamic data. So more specifically, a layout could be like the following. You will have that top navigation, you will have the container, you will have that menu. That's kind of the shell, and the content, which comes from dynamic data, is like a separate thing. So in the critical resources, if we point it out to what we mentioned before about caching the critical resources, you will put all the shell stuff there, and all the dynamic data you don't care, because that will come from the server when you get internet access, or if you cache that. Okay, we have a quiz, but I don't really know. How are you right now, Ice? Do you want to do the quiz? Do you want to skip it? There is a prize, like all the swag comes from this quiz. Do you want to do it? Yes, no? Yes? Okay, so big applause for the winners! Woo! Even if you didn't win, I will give you some stickers, so that's fine. And the winner just come after the talk, and I will give you like cool t-shirts. Okay, so we are gonna, this is the end. I mean, I'm gonna skip the Q&A. Like, if you have questions, Slack me today in the hackathon, send me messages on Twitter or my email, whatever. I'm just gonna, this is like, once I publish the slides, you can review these, but this is kind of like people to follow. Like, they are super into progressive web apps. Most of the people works at Google, but yeah, there are other interesting people out there as well. I put it a list of the action items, so I would suggest first, oh, yeah, were you taking a picture of this? I will suggest like a list of action items here, because like, you know, I know like we have going through lots of different stuff. This is not like a super easy topic. This like requires time. So I added a list of action items that you can follow in your house or whatever, which is first fork the PWA project, start it locally, play around with that. Reread this presentation and open some of the links. I added lots of resources and lots of stuff that is really helpful. And basically execute each steps to add progressive enhancement to your app, etc. Action items 2 is research on advanced topics and you feel comfortable and confident about what you did today and what you learned today. So background sync, IndexDB, push notification with web push, HTTP2. Here is a list of resources that you can check later on. My slides, I'm gonna post them on Twitter. I will probably share a message also on Slack just in case you're that people that don't like Twitter. And one more thing. Ta-da! No, you're not excited? So, okay. So the one more thing here is I want to do a contest. So I want you, like, once you finish this presentation, to play around with some of these ideas to create your first progressive web app. So this is what you can earn. If you go to bit.ly PWA contest, it's just like a Google form. So you just need to share either your GitHub repository or either a link to a production-ready project. So I'm gonna give away one Eventbrite t-shirt with Go Live, which is kind of like what we used when we went public. I'm gonna give away a t-shirt of Developers in Dev, which is my baby. It's my YouTube show, and it's like kind of like, oh, actually this t-shirt, do you think it's cool? I think the logo is super cool, right? Angela is she designed this. It was fun. Then 1 hour of pair programming session. I love pair programming, and I think it's a fantastic way to learn new stuff and to practice stuff. So either 1 hour of pair programming or a coaching session about your career or whatever you have. Or if you want to skip this because you don't want to talk with me, that's fine. Then Eventbrite stickers as well as the idea stickers. Actually, I think like I have stickers for all of you, and you were a super amazing audience, so just come here and I will give you stickers. And then a badge with my Photoshop skills. I created like a badge, which is like more like, yeah, it's cool. It's like a recognition from me to you, but that's it. It's not, what's the word that they use on Twitter? It's not retweets are not, what's the endorsements, right? Well, it can be an endorsement if you want. But yeah, that's it. Bit.ly though, bit.ly PWA contest. I wanna finish this with a quote, which is, for me, the progressive web apps are the future, so don't miss it out and start learning them now. So thank you very much.